All right. Hello, everyone. To all the early birds that joined, we just hit 1 p.m. Eastern, and welcome to the WorkTango webinar. Excited to see you all. Typically, in the first minute or two, people are filing in, coming after meetings, but want to welcome you all here today. Please let me know in the chat where you're all in from today. It'd be great to see where folks are joining us on today's WorkTango webinar from far and wide. I am sitting in Toronto, where the weather is absolutely beautiful. And we finally have some good weather. We got some East Texas and Michigan. All right, all over. Love it. Yeah, we got a couple of months of this weather, and then we get back to minus 40. Great. It's so nice to see a bunch of new faces I don't recognize, a bunch of people in our community already, and it's such a great WorkTango community that joins us for these types of initiatives. As people are filing in, just as an introduction, my name is Rob Catalano. The Chief Strategy Officer here at WorkTango, and we do this on mostly on a monthly basis, bringing the community together to learn from each other, to be educated, to be inspired, and I'm excited to welcome you all here to today's webinar and today's topic, which is really focusing on employee experience and the influence that organizational change has on employees through that journey. If you haven't been here before, a reminder, we're an interactive bunch. We definitely encourage folks to go to the chat and add your ideas and thoughts. There's a Q&A section where you can ask questions. We're not going to keep questions to the end. We might, but I'm going to try to infuse your questions into the conversation today. So think of me working for all of you to be able to double click on things our panelists and discussion is going to be about today. And I want to be your voice to help navigate through the conversation. Looking at the chat again, we got a lot of Texas. So we got Edmonton. Good luck today in the NHL playoffs. I'm rooting for you. Before I actually, the next thing I wanted to do actually was introduce our panelists. I'm very excited to have three fantastic CEOs on today's conversation. So jump off camera. I would love to see you all. What I wanted to do is before getting into the questions, I wanted to have each of them actually introduce themselves. Give a quick introduction about, what your role is about, a little bit about your background, and actually just one fun question. The last concert you went to. I think, always interested in people's music tastes. And if I hear one I haven't heard of before, I like to take that and kind of add that to my list. But we'll start with Jessica and then John and then Monique. I just saw a thumbs up. I love that. Yes. All the reactions. We love all this stuff and the interactivity with the group here. We'll start with Jessica and then, I'd love to get your intro.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here. My name is Jessica Cryer. I'm a managing partner and CEO of an advisory and training firm called the Experience Advisors. We're based out of Toronto, Ontario, in Canada. Excited today to come to you with a perspective of not only the lived experiences of transformation and change that I've gone through during my time at Deloitte and Cognizant, but also centered around a lot of the advisory work we do for clients, supporting them in their change journeys, and really how do you start to elevate and make sure that the employee experience is aligned to that. So excited to be here. The Experience Advisors is also a partner of WorkTango, so we're extra excited to be here to meet some of you folks and have some good conversation.
In your last concert, Jessica, I can't let you off the hook.
Oh, yes. It was a cover band called the 99s that we saw in a barn 2 weeks ago. So it was a fun event.
Love it. Awesome. John.
Thanks, Rob. Pleasure to be here today. I am John Fetterman. I'm the CEO of a company called Higher Road. Higher Road is a private equity-backed roll-up of 4 different companies coming together with various HR software solutions with a lead dog in people analytics. So I've lived and breathed the experience of driving culture in change. How do you go from being a small, scrappy startup to joining forces with 3 other companies and creating a new vision and new culture and doing it, while you're driving down the highway? So that's a lot of what I've lived and breathed and happy to talk about.
Awesome. And last concert, John.
A little while back, we went and saw Ray LaMontagne and had a great evening of some really great music.
Love it. Amazing. Thanks so much for being here, John. Appreciate it. I like the while driving down the highway comment. And Monique, someone who I know well. Welcome, and yeah, let's have an introduction from your end.
Thanks, Rob. Long time no see. Hi, everyone. Monique McDonough. I'm the CEO here at WorkTango. I've been here for about 4 years. I was part of the predecessor organization, Kazoo, which is the recognition and reward side of employee engagement. And we merged with WorkTango, which is the survey and insights part of employee engagement. Have spent my time in and out of small companies and large companies. I've been through multiple transactions. And prior to coming here, I was at Gartner by way of the CEB acquisition. So like John and Jessica are very familiar with what it's like to try to build cultures across multiple organizations coming together. So really excited about the dialogue that we're going to have today.
Awesome. And I got to ask you about the concert. I'm so curious.
I'm trying to think chronologically, so I'll go with the one that I think was the last one, which was Trombone Shorty, who typically tours with the Rebirth Brass Band, so New Orleans Jazz.
Love it. All right, I got some new things on my list. Even people in the chat are contributing. Kylie Minogue, I saw her at F1 recently at a random, but she was one of my last ones as well. So again, really happy to have you all here. And all these folks are here for a reason, not only the change that they've seen in their current organizations, also in their career and past lives, even working with customers that going through this change and this journey. And so I'm really interested in getting in that CEO perspective of the conversation. But before getting into asking them questions and into that discussion, I wanted to set up the conversation today. So we decided to have this webinar on the heels of some research that we recently did in partnership with an organization called Talent LMS. And basically this study was trying to understand what is the impact of org change on employees, right? And we actually conducted the survey in March. It was 1,200 employees across all industries, and really tying into companies that went through organizational change. So it could have been layoffs or downsizing. It could be company restructuring. It could be M&A that we heard about. It could be a large CEO change. And in summary, what we were really trying to understand in the research was how employees are impacted. And we just talked about four people on this call, and all of us have seen impact in our careers. So it does impact a lot of people, but we want to know how are employees impacted, and can we identify any blind spots to help us in processes moving forward, and then share that with the rest of the world. Now, this research will be shared with all of you that are on the call in your follow-up email with the webinar and the link. You'll also get the research, and there's a lot of really great nuggets there. What I found most interesting and maybe alarming at the same time that I want to share with you all to set up the discussion today were actually 2 data points. One is that what you see on the screen here is we asked folks whether organizational change in my company has increased anxiety. And basically 2/3 of your organization have increased anxiety. But change, and when the research digs deeper into this, it realizes that it's more about things like mental health, less willingness to wanting to stay at your organization. The uncertainty is breeding this level of anxiety in our organization, and not just a small amount, but 2/3. And speaking of anxiety, when we asked folks whether employees' voices were heard and considered during the change process, only a quarter actually felt that their employee feedback was heard and considered, right? When folks don't know what's happening or understand the impact of change, that's when uncertainty comes in, and uncertainty breeds disengagement. So there's a lot more data that, in the research we'll send to you, but this data is a product of organizations, I think, forgetting about or not leaning into employee experience when there's major change and transformation. So that's really what we're here to talk about today, right? The goal is to get a CEO perspective on 3 things. One, how important they feel org changes is an organizational leader, right? In terms of growth of the company and impact on that level. Second, how they partner with not only the HR organization, but other parts of the organization, right? To make sure that we're focusing with the right lens on employee experience to drive change in a good way that are touching on the positive experiences we saw in some of the data, as well as what's worked in your experience, what hasn't worked. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ditch the slides and want to dive into the discussion today. So hopefully everyone can see all of our panelists. We don't got slides anymore. We're here for our conversation. And what I wanted to start with is, before we get into how we do this, right? How do we focus on the right things to create good experiences across organizational change? I want to explore why this topic is relevant to all of you as CEOs, and why it's so critical to your business. And I'll start with you, John, and then love to hear from obviously Monique and Jessica. One, can you actually share a recent major change or transformation that you've had, right? I want to kind of make sure that we understand lived experiences and any of the big aha moments when you think about the employee experience on that major change. But I also want you to follow up with like, why is this topic even important to you, right? You run your organizations, you're accountable for its growth and its success. So why is it important? And what suffers when it comes to your business when we're not focused on a great employee experience? So John, kick us off and excited to dive in.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. As I said when during introductions, I had the experience in my current role of coming in just post a roll up, a private equity sponsored roll up of 4 companies. And one of the challenges was that there was seemingly, forgive me, seemingly an inside group and an outside group. And what that means is that the company that was in the driver's seat of the acquisition was doing a lot of talking and not a lot of listening. And what you ended up with was a disenfranchised company that was told, hey, we're all walking in lockstep. Hey, we're all one company. Yet it felt to 3/4 of the company that they were outsiders. And fundamentally, what had happened is that the board had that epiphany through a lot of feedback from employees and a large churn, whole bunch of employees taking off. And what it said is that if you're going to do a roll up, that an organizational change needs to include a cultural acceptance and invitation. And frankly, what we saw and felt was that it was the my team or no team which alienated so many. So the experience that I had here was coming in with fresh eyes, having an ear open to effectively all the employees. There was nobody on a better footing, as it were. And what we saw is that the change was absolutely obvious and pretty immediate. That people felt that they were, in the boat rowing in the same direction, and every other cliche that you can come up with about people feeling that they were part of something. And the other thing that we did is we created a series of town halls that were more than us speaking, but were much more Q&A, get to know each other, spend time with each other's products, with each other's groups, understand what drove each other's customers' profiles. And then the best ideas started coming from the team. And at least what we found is once everyone felt their thumbprint was on the future, you had one company and you had real engagement.
Love it. I think cultural acceptance and invitation is a really cool concept that I'm 100% stealing. I really liked it. I think, what I heard was the aha moment was a bit of the um, fact that, there need to be more listening than kind of doing and talking. And I like what you said there in so many words. When change isn't done to employees, but they're part of the process, right? That's a really different feeling when you think about your engagement or your experience at work. And one last follow up, John, before hearing from Jessica Monique. When you think about the impact to your business, right? Like, why is it critical to business? What business outcomes were you aligning maybe some of this change work to success of the organization? I'd love to hear a little more from that lens.
Yeah, it happened pretty organically. Once everyone began to understand each other's products, they finally began to see what the private equity's vision was and how a single united product footprint created a better experience regardless of from where each customer came. And so we started to see the ideas of not just customer engagement, but how do you get not just, pardon me, employee engagement, but how does that become customer engagement? How do the customers get excited about your vision? How do they almost sell themselves on the power and the synergies between the various products and solutions? So it becomes this circle where when your employees get excited, they bring along their customers, they get excited, and then when you begin to sort of drive that vision, it fulfills itself, and a really really exciting transformation internally and externally.
Yeah, I love you made that connection, right? We always talk that like customer sat and shareholder value or outputs. The only things that impacted are the employee inputs, and if they're disenfranchised or they're not included,
Yep.
you're looking at it as a business growth mechanism. So thanks, John. I'm actually going to switch to Jessica here. Like, I know you do a lot of work actually not only on EX but also the CX side of the lens. So kind of the same question when you think about lived experience to kind of set the table for the discussion, but also biggest aha moments and any things you've seen or with your customers and any impact organizationally. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, this is an interesting one I want to share. It's one of our clients. It's a service-based industry, high performing, high talent. And full disclosure that we don't have a solution to the problem right now, but want to share it because I think it's an interesting one that others may be going through and maybe feeling as well. And so during COVID, they took a very liberal approach around, as many organizations supporting their employees in a transition of change. Things like your work your way, team pledges, all in around the well-being and how to support, which was an amazing kind of transition for them to go through. Again, being a culture where it was 5 days in the office to now flexibility, and they maintain that flexibility. But as a result of that, many factors, obviously the economy is changing, different things are going on, sales decline, productivity reduced as well. And so they're getting back to more, again, in-office culture, high productivity, high performing. And there's a bit of retaliation that's now happening with employees. And so, an interesting example was a resource was being proposed to being staffed on a project. And their comment back to the partner at the time was, I've actually pre-booked yoga for a year at lunch, so I'm no longer going to be able to commit to that project. And so you can imagine the response from a partner saying, you're coming in as a, early career individual, and you're declining a project based on your kind of social schedule. And so it's almost as the pendulum has swung so far in one direction that it's how do we start to reset? And I think it's something that we've seen a lot with our clients is that, like everything, you kind of have to go in one direction to be able to get that happy middle ground. But what does that look like? And it is a big cultural change because you've set these norms, these expectations. And it's about, reestablishing what it is and a value proposition that resonates with everyone, where it's not as crude as, if we don't work hard, then we're not going to have clients and you're not going to have a job. But it's, we are in this together and we want to respect the work-life boundary. And what does that look like? But in practical terms, how can we continue to be successful as an organization, especially if you want to be kind of that A player, frontline individual within the organization. And so, it was the big aha moment for me. And the takeaway from this is that being very thoughtful in the actions that you kind of instill and put forward. And I think it's really easy to react quickly and say, an extra 10 days a year off, and we'll add time to this and we'll do that. But what is the business impact to what we're doing? And if we need to retract and take that back, how is that going to change the employee culture and experience? I think everyone is so keen to do these additional things, and it's great. But it's, you need to have the foresight, and how do we start to pull some of this back if and when we need to pivot.
Love it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I just want to comment, Jessica. We all live it.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is when I think that for us organizationally, it's also it's the cohort from where they're coming. So what we had, for instance, and it was a tough one. We talked about it as an executive team. We had a client wanted to meet at noon, and one of our younger employees responded, "Well, that's when he walks his dog." And how do you drive that balance of, you can't,
Yeah.
and still be a place where people want to be and work, but create, the walls in which that freedom can operate.
And I think, John, you said it earlier, which is a really great point, which is you have to start with what do your customers expect, right? We're in the business because of what our customers ask us to do, and we have the privilege of delivering. And so trying to remind employees that this is why we're here and our job is to serve our customers. And if we need to reset boundaries or on occasion make different decisions, that's fine. And, certainly listen to employees. But at the end of the day, we are here because of the opportunity that we have to serve our customers.
Yeah.
And continuing to come back to the why for employees to understand what the boundaries are, why boundaries are set, at what point can we set limitations, and then working through the alternatives. So I
think creating the environment when they are in the office that they feel those levels of engagement and make it worth it to them. So for instance, you can say all the the happy talk about mentoring. But if you're in the office as a senior leader and your door's closed and you've got younger people in the office, they're not feeling that. And
Yeah.
so it's up to us to walk the walk and create an engaging environment that makes them want to come in.
Absolutely.
Love it. Well, I want to round out this thread because right now we're just talking about like our stories and the why. We want to get into how and how we execute this and who we partner with in the organization. But Monique, any last components of just lived experiences, aha moments, and impact on business?
Yeah, I think when I've seen organizational change go well, when we're looking at kind of bringing multiple organizations together or taking big strategic shifts, the biggest aha is leadership, meaning the executive leadership team can only do so much. The importance of the cascade to multiple levels of leadership is critical, because if you go through and you survey when you're undertaking a strong organizational change, you'll often hear things like leadership doesn't get this or leadership doesn't understand that. And what you need to understand is where's that breakdown, right? Leadership can be your ELT, it can be your XLT, it can be your leader of leaders, it could be your frontline managers. And what's really important to understand is that all of those constituencies need to be bought into. What is the change? Why are we doing this? What is my role? How can we be successful as an organization? And so making sure that you're taking stock of how well you're doing at educating and communicating all of those critical components, and most importantly, the progress against the change, and helping people understand that it's a journey, not a moment in time. That's really what's so important. So the big aha is you can't just say it, you have to live it, and you have to help multiple layers of leadership live it as well.
Awesome. Really great. A lot of nuggets. I was going to kind of summarize things I heard, but what I'm going to do instead is there was a really good question that came in, and I'd love to get the perspective of the panel. But some employees will push back on addressing the gray area if we explain the why, which is our customers and our business / job security. How do you draw the hard line for those who are the debate specialists? I love the way that question was asked. But yeah, so we're talking about that CXEX. We're talking about business purpose in terms of some of these changes, which companies change to try to grow. Any thoughts on Amelia's question around addressing the gray area and how do you draw the hard line for those that are the debate specialists?
Yeah, maybe I can jump in. Happy to share a perspective on this. And I think, again, every organization, every culture is different. You know, what we see in public sector for context versus private sector, a bit different in terms of obviously the culture of the environment and the employees. And I think one of the things is I think healthy debate is good, but I think, to earlier points made is setting those boundaries. And there's an element of at a certain point, this is what the boundaries are. This is a culture that we're establishing. And this is kind of the work ethic and the work mantra that we have. And if it's not in alignment and it's not a fit, then it's not the right person for the right role and the right job. And I think, more and more what we've experienced in our own organization, and again, like I said, on speaking behalf of some of our clients, is pushing people uphill to find their fit can be a losing battle sometimes. And so as a leader within an organization, it's part of our job, I believe, is helping people understand what is that culture, what is the environment that we're trying to achieve, where do you fit into that? And if you personally don't align with it, then that's a personal choice. And that's where someone needs to self-exit. And again, maybe harsh for some, but I think that's just a reality, because one bad nugget, as we've all seen, that just the messaging and the toxicity that can happen within the workplace, it's hard to come back from that. And so it's open to debate, but at a certain point, it kind of setting the tone and setting the boundaries of what it is.
You accept what you tolerate,
Monique
right?
kind of said it, right? But I had a boss years and years ago, and he used to say, "Hey, let's just try to pretend for a minute that we're here to make money. Let's just," and when you kind of get back to that basic,
Yeah.
we're not here just to give you the free lunches. We're not here to be, this sweet, nurturing place all the time. We're purpose driven, and we're here to create shareholder value. And we're here to create a place where people can grow their careers. And none of that happens if we don't have customers who are delighted. So if you put yourself in that mindset that we're all just here to delight customers, to get them to be our best referral partners, to get them to be enthusiastic upsell candidates, then you're sort of forgetting why we're here.
I love it.
Great. Yeah. So great question. Thank you so much for sharing. So I think some really good table stakes for the whys and the lens to look at the world at, whether we're the CEO or the HR leader really trying to drive change with, again, HR gets really involved in. What I want to shift gears on the next question, and I'll start with you, Jessica, is that let's talk about what we can do about it. So when it comes to effective ways of communicating change or building that trust, what have you done in the past to support employees during times of uncertainty, and maybe what you've done well or what you failed and learned at in your experience? I'd love to hear from the panel on some of the prescriptive things that we can take away to our own teams, organizations through change we might be going through now, or it will be coming.
Yeah, for sure. Like every good consultant, we follow process. No surprise there. But so share with you kind of some of the stages that we look. And I think it's important too when we talk about change. I think a lot of the examples that we've been sharing are kind of these larger, broader changes, companies merging together, major cultural shifts. But it's also important to look at it the lens of, you're implementing a new CRM system, a new technology. What's the change associated with that? Yes, in someone's mind, it may just be a process change, but there's a lot behind the scenes that happen. And especially when you're, for some of these large organizations that we support. So, one of the examples is a provincial regulator. So they serve the province of BC, and they have thousands of nurses and doctors, as well as all their internal employees. So you can imagine a large scale technology rollout requires a whole change structure around it. And so when we come into support with someone like that, it's, starting with understanding what is the impact. So conducting a book of change or building, a book of change, and understanding, what is every role, what is every individual, what is every process shift that's going to happen. So having a very structured view around what's actually changing, being able to set up a cadence and frequency around conducting surveys. And so, pre-technology deployment, what are some of the challenges that people are having? What are some of the opportunities that they see with this? And then the right cadence around collecting that feedback. So it's really assessing kind of the desire and the ability to support and roll out that change, which, kind of goes into, Monique, what you were talking about a little bit around that change network and engagement plan. And so this is being able, aligned to that book of change, what is that peer network of champions within the organization? So it's not just being driven from top down, but within every line of business, who are the individuals that are going to be the advocates for change, that are going to field the questions, are going to be able to have the tough conversations that maybe individuals don't want to escalate to leadership. Setting up that recurring communication schedule, protocol template. And that's a really key one. And I think something that, people know about, they talk about, but whether they do it effectively and consistently, to me, is the key word there. And making sure, again, it's everything from pre-change actually happening, during, and post as well. And then finally, the training plan. And again, not with every change you're going to necessarily need training, but think technology implementation. What is the kind of the technical training, but also the so what and the why behind it? And that was another, big reminder, I would say. I wouldn't say lesson, because I think we have a good kind of understanding going into this, but a good reminder is that, as much as you need to complement the technical training when we're doing a system implementation, helping people understand how are their roles changing. And I think, how is this going to make my job better? What are the process improvements, and how does it across the organization? And I think the reason I really believe right now this is going to be so imperative is with AI just fundamentally changing the way that people are working. Roles are going to change, technology more so now than ever. Again, not a new conversation, but everyone's sitting in the back seat thinking, is my job going to be here tomorrow? Especially when you start looking at some of more of the administrative front role individuals. And so as we roll out these new technologies and we start to change these processes, making sure that people understand where they still fit within that ecosystem. And if they don't fit, how are we managing the conversations around what that org structure and change starts to look like? So I know you mentioned this, Rob. We do have a handout that'll get sent out just around what are those steps that we typically follow. And again, just a good way of thinking, as you get into some of these major programs, how are you going to wrap change all around it versus kind of inserting it at a point in time?
So Jessica, there's a couple things about what you said that I just think really resonate. One is this notion of kind of informal feedback loops. We very much believe, right, we're a survey and insights company. This is what we do. Like we survey our employees all the time and get a sense of kind of what's working and where we have opportunities to grow and develop. But those kind of informal feedback loops are critical, whether that's driven by HR, whether that's having conversations with a smaller network of individuals that are within the organization that make sure that what you're trying to drive in terms of change is really resonating with the individuals who are impacted and affected by the change. And if they can't see the what's in it for me, not just what's in it for the business, but breaking it down to that personal level of how is the change going to be better for them, then there's an opportunity there to like really make sure that you revisit what is your communication strategy, how are you closing the loop with the feedback, and that kind of gets to the second part is where I see organizations struggle is when they're not taking the victory lap of the progress they're making towards the organizational change, right? Because people can see the discomfort of something is new and different. There's a lot more uncertainty, or I'm not really sure how this is going to help me, and this feels really hard. But when you start to demonstrate the progress you're making on that organizational change journey, they can start to get more bought into, oh, my life does look better on the other side of this technical change, like you said, or this evolution towards AI, or two really awesome companies coming together that are going to create better value for our customers, like whatever it is. So making sure that you're carving the time in multiple settings to show everybody how you are making progress to the plan, how you're hearing the feedback and reacting to it, and making shifts and adjustments as necessary based upon what you're seeing. So I just really, what you said resonated to me a lot.
I'm curious, when you talk about carving out time, like any specific, like really prescriptive thing that you've done or it's been done in your change journey as well. I'm trying to think of brass tacks. What can we do differently tomorrow?
Yeah, so great question. And I think it's really organizational dependent. So I'll tell you kind of how we do things at WorkTango, and Rob will attest to the fact that we tried a lot of different things until we got to a rhythm that really worked. But when we started on this journey of merging two really awesome organizations together, we listened all the time through our survey and insights tools. So we would do a regular pulse. Believe it or not, we started weekly with our employee population to really understand, did we understand what the issues were and were we moving the needle? We then got to a place where we could do it every 2 weeks, and now we still do it monthly. It's kind of ingrained in our DNA. If we don't do it, employees say like, where's my survey, right? And we have really high participation, which is awesome. But the reason why people still participate is we make it very public what we're doing in terms of responding to the feedback. So we will show in all hands, hey, here's what the data told us about how you're feeling. Here's how it's up or down since the last survey. Thank you for taking it. Here are some of the questions. Let's answer the questions. We'll then post the answers to the questions. So it's all very transparent. And then we'll tell everybody, this is what we're going to do next. And then you just kind of repeat that same motion of predictability to say, here's what you told us. Here's our response. Here's what we're going to do differently. And then give us, time to make that change. And what we found is that the number of questions came down, the level of engagement went up, people seemed to buy in. We started seeing, more people leaning into the change versus leaning away from it. But it takes a little bit of time, and you have to have the trust within the organization to believe that you're going to act, right? And that trust takes a little bit of time. I'm sure John, in a 4-company roll up, like that's hard, right? And you've got 4 different sets of perspectives, not organizationally, let alone all of the employees. And so building that trust quickly can be hard, but if you're committed to it and committed to bringing people along in the change, incredibly powerful.
I just want to add, I love what you were saying around the transparency of the share back of the results, because I think we've seen where this has fallen short, where our clients are continually engaging and sending out surveys, but it's a lack of follow-up, and then you lose the engagement, and then it becomes more of an annoyance than anything, and it kind of is doing the opposite of what it should be doing. And so I think being able to commit to that, and what is the right level that you're sharing back. And it sounds like, you may not have the answers to everything if you're doing it on a weekly basis, but at least it's being acknowledged and what you are able to share back. I think that's fantastic.
Sorry, I was typing something in the chat. no such thing as survey fatigue. There's lack of action fatigue. We've seen it, seen it all throughout my career. Maybe one last follow-up, not to ask maybe a little vulnerable question. We think about building trust with our employees or communication, anything that failed, anything you did that you might not do again or recommend to do again in your career, or maybe you were on the other end of it and experienced it that way.
I would say, of course, right? Anytime you're leading a large change, there are a certain set of people who will eventually get on board. And as Jessica, you were describing earlier, there sometimes will be people who just don't see the vision, or they are struggling to figure out how it can be beneficial to them. And the hardest part, I think, is if you believe it and you are trying to do the right thing and you're leaning into the business and certain individuals, and there just isn't that ability to build trust. As a leader, that can be really hard because it isn't from a lack of willingness or trying to engage, but sometimes you have to have that mutual relationship that just won't get there. So I would say the times that you see people who don't want to be on the journey is hard, especially if they're great contributors, but sometimes you have to make those decisions, or they will guide themselves to the decisions that maybe it's just not the right fit.
I think one of the challenging things that I've lived through, and we now see with some of our clients, and it's again coming from a place of I don't necessarily have the answer to this all the time, but is balancing this need for information for everyone and what is the right level to share out with the right people at the right time. And I think you're always going to have the individuals that want to know everything that's going on. And I think back to a moment when way back when I was at a firm called Idea Couture, we're getting purchased by Cognizant, and at the time it was an interesting moment as an employee, like mid-level manager at the time. And it was like, you literally saw people go into a room, have a conversation. You knew something was happening, but no one ever was saying out loud what was going on. And so, and again, it's, how do you respect the boundaries of communication, but at the same time, making sure people feel aware of a general level of understanding of the impact to what's to what's happening. And I think, as we, as I was sharing within some of the process steps that we fall is what is that right communication cadence and at the right level, and making sure that leaders are able to share messages down, but also, again, draw the line of what they are able to share. I just, something that I see very often, because I think that's also what erodes trust too, right? And so it's making sure that you're able to be consistent in your communication, honest as much as you can, and transparent as much as you can as well.
Yeah, I think where it does fall apart is where the senior leadership team isn't completely in lockstep themselves. And I think that the most important thing I have found is that if there's any light between a point of view and there's an eye roll, there's a lack of treating the SLT as team one and rather treating your departmental team as team one, that's where things begin to erode. And my view is that if you create a senior leadership team and you spend your time there culturally to make sure that everybody in that room, to Monique's point, if somebody's not on board, if they're not in lockstep, it will absolutely deteriorate your culture faster than anything else ever will. Because at that point, all of the decisions, all of the directional guidance, all of the culture you're trying to create is held against this sort of almost this veil of does everybody buy in? And once there's that little seed of doubt, it will deteriorate all the hard work you're trying to accomplish. And organizationally, what you'll find is that those who are reticent in whatever way will gravitate towards that member of the leadership team that they think has an ear for their perspective. And at the end of the day, when I'm in the room with the VP of marketing, or I'm out of the room and the VP of marketing is there without me, if the employees hear a different perspective on the company's vision, it is absolutely like you had in elementary school. It'll create factions rather than unity, and it'll just build upon itself. So I think that the most important thing is we all have these grandiose, plans to make sure every member of the company's in lockstep. That's impossible. It's certainly impossible when you get to any kind of scale. But if you've got a senior leadership team of 8 or 10 people, if those 8 or 10 people aren't 100% aligned, the rest of it's going to fall flat. And I've learned that through, tough personal experience. And so I'll spend my time when I go into an organization really understanding that dynamic first and foremost, because at the end of the day, they're the advocates for me as the CEO. And I need to know that when I'm not there, it's not that you don't question things. It's not that you're not nimble. It's not that the market doesn't change a direction, but it's that it's vetted as an SLT and then distributed out as thought leadership, not the other way around.
It's funny when Jessica started on this line of questioning, you used the word advocate, and it's kind of full circle when you think about not only all the employees within the organization, but obviously your senior leadership team. Good kind of full circle there. Actually, one comment on advocates, we always think advocates have to be our leaders in our org, but like Monique will attest, like we're trying to go through an AI transformation on how we use it every day and how we implement it into our workplace. There are people that are not leaders that are advocates and they raise their hand. And if you can define those people, it definitely helps from a change perspective. And what we found has really worked as well when it comes to that advocacy. So we started off on a bit of why it's important, right? We talked a bit about what are some of the things we can do. I want to shift gears now in terms of who. And I have two simple questions. Who, in your opinion, is job it is to lead organizational change? And I want to filter in whether it's, in the HR org or not. How do you as CEO partner with HR on change and transformation? What are your expectations of what they're accountable for? So we'll dive in. I'll start with you, Monique, and then we'll kind of go on hear people's questions. And someone actually asked the same question in the Q&A. So I was going to get there, and I just did. So hopefully this is helpful.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, as I said earlier, leadership, multiple levels of leadership are the ones who are accountable, right? The XLT, right, the executive leadership team will set the tone, but needs to make sure that they're aligned. Johnny, you had fantastic points there. But then also that the senior leadership team below them is aligned and that they can start executing on those departmental pieces. That leadership cascade is critical. But what I would say is the role of HR is like, you are in the front row seat, right? It's really important that HR has a pulse and a role and a voice in helping to understand what's working, where are things not working, how should we think differently about engaging different stakeholders, what new information has surfaced, how do we get ahead of some of the challenges? And I think through any major organizational change or transformational change, HR as the representative of the employee voice has to have a seat at the table. Rob will attest, Christian Martinez, our head of people and culture, is like my right hand through everything to understand, okay, what is the impact on the individuals? Which departments are going to feel disproportionately challenged in what we're doing? How do we make things easier? What do we need to do to get them more engaged in the process to understand what resources do we need to give to them, right? This isn't just about buy-in. This is how do we support them through resources, training, adaptations of work, potentially new roles and responsibilities that will open up because of the change, right? Really thinking through not just the first step of communication, but longer term, as Jessica was talking about the planning, what are the impacts on employees along the way? And how do we help stay 1 or 2 steps ahead of where employees are so they can see where the benefits for them sit? And you can't do that without HR. I think HR as any kind of partner in transformation is critical.
Any thoughts, Jessica, John?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add, I absolutely agree with that. I think, the way that we've always kind of looked at it at that CEO executive level, it's really about the messaging and setting the tone. But as you start to go kind of down within the organization, that's where you start to have these change champions, which start to operationalize it. And that to me is so important. You need clear messaging and direction and unity, but you also need to make sure at an operational level, people understand what's changing day to day, whether again, it's a keystroke, whether it's a process change, whether it's a behavior or mentality change. And I think sometimes that's where we've seen it fall short, is that it stays at this higher level strategic kind of operational level. HR is engaged in terms of making sure they have a pulse on what's happening. But then without the right training, without the right tactics, without the right tools to actually bring that change to life, then everything starts to fall short. But it truly is, it's, you know, everyone in lockstep, understanding the roles that they play, and again, making sure that the consistency in the messaging.
I think it's a unique challenge for the HR leader because they have to, Jessica used the word lockstep, they have to be in lockstep, but they also have to have the ear to the ground, and they have to be a place where employees aren't afraid to push back and share how they're feeling if it doesn't feel right. And they have to feel as though they're not walking into a firing squad. If they question a direction or a move that is organizationally impactful. And so I have found that the toughest role in all this organizational change discussion is the role of the HR leader, because they have to be that confidant, and they also have to be the purveyor of, you know, where the senior leadership team believes the company needs to go. So they're walking that fine line, but if they lose that ability to have people share their honest feedback, you're also missing out on a whole bunch of really important data.
Yeah, and I can see HR being incredibly effective at walking that fine line, but also being an effective coach to those individuals who just don't quite piece it all together, right? Yep. So if they can help an individual who's struggling, or potentially even a manager, right, who's struggling on what the change means and how to go about the shifting and changing of priorities and focus areas, being able to coach him or her to understand how to effectively raise your voice in what forum with what individuals, right? That's a great professional development opportunity. And we all know change is constant, whether we're talking about big change or little change. Things are always dynamic in organizations, but to be able to understand how to navigate that professionally, and that it's okay to have a dissenting voice as long as it's channeled appropriately and you're leaning into the business, like that can be viewed as it being a really positive thing. But I often see HR having that objectivity to be able to coach the individual to understand what is the effective way for you to get your message across and feel heard, and also to be receptive to an alternative way of thinking about the challenge.
There's an interesting question that came in from someone on the one of the attendees, and I'm very curious on your perspectives. But it asks, how do you propose HR navigates a space when they are circumvented with organizational change?
Can you give a little bit?
Or maybe we need more clarity.
Yeah.
The circumvented, I think, is the hard thing. I don't know that I would necessarily agree with HR being circumvented in change. But again, that's not my question, so I'm struggling a little bit with how to answer effectively.
Cool. We'll ask this anonymous attendee if there's any more color. Please throw it in the Q&A, and maybe we'll get back to it. One of the things we asked a lot in the research outside of the things we're talking about was really around learning. And kind of, if you think about from an HR lens, change sometimes requires an L&D perspective, people potentially having to do something different or learn something different. So I'm curious around what role learning and development plays, whether it's leaders or employees, to adapt or help grow through major transformation or org change.
I could maybe jump in there. They play quite a significant role, again, depending on also the context of the change that's going through. So again, think of it in terms of a new system rollout, technology change. Everything from understanding from a process perspective, how the employee's role is going to change, through to what are those changes in their job function, designing all the curriculum around that, being able to roll it out. But more than just designing and delivering training, understanding the points within that employee experience where it makes sense to interject kind of learning moments and opportunities. And I think it's important to look at both from a, formal structured training to support a process, technology change, so forth. But then what are those kind of opportunistic moments where we can help coach and guide and reinforce, that vision for change as well. And I think, you have manager huddles or group huddles. You think of a contact center going through a massive change in a new process or CRM rollout or so forth. How are you changing your daily huddles to support, a key learning that can help make you more productive or effective in your role as well? And so I think one of the biggest successes that we've seen is that in partnership with HR, and often, for some companies, HR, L&D are tightly intertwined, making sure that lens on learning is happening at the forefront of the change so that it's mapped out properly, as opposed to an afterthought where the organization has gone through it and then we kind of interject it at the end. Because employees want to know what's happening, but they also want to know what they need to know to be successful in this future state. And that's where L&D plays such a critical role in that.
Yeah, I would say that every organizational change is an opportunity to learn new skills or to build muscle in areas where you haven't had a chance to do that. So if I think about Kazoo and WorkTango coming together, we had similar roles, but the way we were approaching, for example, customer success was a little bit different. And so as we were creating a combined organization, there were different kinds of skill sets that were required for our customer-facing professionals to lean into the organization. Some people were mentors through that process to share their knowledge, and other people were learning about the different skills that were required based upon the different product sets that we needed to support. In addition, as we were merging the organizations together, we created new roles that neither organization actually had, because we saw overlap in what was existing in some of our support and technical project management areas, where we just said, gosh, we need to build stronger muscle in particular areas to be great coaches to our customers. And so really taking a step back and thinking about what are the skills and gifts that our current employees have, where do we see the organization transforming to, and then how do we map what they currently have with what they need to have and build a structure in which they can build those skills over time and get to the eventual end state. Like, again, learning and development has to be a part of that, because you want people to see how the change will help their career and help them professionally to evolve. And for newer employees, if this is their first big change, they may not see it or get it. It's more scary than it is opportunistic. And so the more HR in conjunction with L&D, in conjunction with the leaders of the functions, can think about what that change is going to look like and show the vision, and also the steps along the way, I think that's really the secret sauce.
Love it. So we had a bunch of questions come in. We had a few more that we wanted to ask. We only have 7 minutes. So this is what I'm going to propose. I'm going to do a quick speed round on 2 questions and get your thoughts. One is around how do you measure change? Like, as your organization, what do you measure? I'm sure you love data and information and it drives your organizations. But how can we measure it and get feedback very, very quickly? What are your thoughts when it comes to measuring change?
Well, I mean, I think that one of the challenges that we have is that the last function in an organization to be data-driven is the people function. And you can measure, via sprints, how the engineering team gets a product out. You can measure via number of beta customers, how a new solution is being adopted. And it's hard to understand how you really, from a data perspective, understand the impacts and quantify what change is. One of the things, and obviously this is something that we're passionate about here, because we're about people analytics. And, whether it's manager effectiveness, whether it's, ability to hire effectively, whether it's mitigating churn, those become data sets, and they become easier. The hard part, and where I know that perhaps Jessica and Monique spend more time, is the qualitative. How do you really begin to understand the emotional impact of change, and how do you quantify what is unquantifiable in some ways? And I'm all ears, because frankly, I am a data-driven guy. And so I think that other side of my brain could use a lot of help. Meaning, how do I take those things that aren't concrete and create real milestones and real, moments of accomplishment to be understood and appreciated and built upon?
I think really quickly, I'll just add kind of my 2 cents on this. One is we use quant and qual data when we're measuring the effectiveness of change, and basic things like your change readiness score. So asking people that at the beginning of the change versus middle versus end of simple questions like how ready are you for this, ready versus not ready. Looking at the adoption rates, again, if you're looking at a technical rollout of something, what are the adoption rates, the productivity rates of something? So how are people actually using what it is that was changed? Any changes in net promoter score as well, I think is a good indication. And oftentimes we'll supplement some of our quant data with the qual data through focus groups, through interviews to get a better pulse on the employees and what they're feeling and give them a chance and an outlet to talk through. And I think the only thing I'll say around that, which has been super beneficial too, is I find through the surveys, you're not always getting the feedback and the insights at the level to help you do change better necessarily the next time. And so having those exploratory conversations to not only understand how well it was received and performed, but also making sure that we're taking the feedback on operationally as an organization. Did it meet your expectations in terms of how we manage the process? And so those layer of insights are super impactful, again, to make sure that we're, hitting the mark, but also that we have this notion of continuous improvement of how we're rolling these out.
Yeah, you reminded me when we went through our merge change, there were 4 tracks and work streams that were happening independently, but they were also measured differently. One was process, like what is changing and improving process-wise. One was tech in terms of tech debt. One was culture, obviously, with engagement, but one was business metrics, like or net promoter score, or thing with our customers. So it's a framework that I've seen work in terms of thinking of change holistically as an org, which a lot of change does impact the whole organization. We have 3 minutes left. Unfortunately, we won't get to all the answers, but I'm going to see how I can try and, or all the questions, sorry, but I see how I can infuse that maybe in a follow-up. Last question, really quick hit. Your one piece of advice for a lot of the HR leaders on this call when it comes to attacking org change. So pretty wide open. But what's one thing you would give folks advice on?
Over communicate. I think we as humans have a tendency to hear some of what people say. And what I've found is that if you continue to come back time and time again to the why are we doing it? What does this mean for us? How does this work? What's the impact on me, right? You hit all of the core areas in your communication, you'll have a higher propensity to have success and less confusion and resistance along the way.
Love it.
I think just on that, it's over communication of the why we're doing this, the why, the how. And then I think I just saw an answer here, or a question, sorry, in the chat around misalignment with leadership. I think it's important at a leadership level, if you're experiencing or seeing something at an employee level where there's misalignment or lack of understanding in what's happening, is helping leaders understand what is the impact if we don't get these teams aligned and people aren't, again, moving in lockstep, moving in unison towards this change. Because I think there is often times where, if you're kind of sitting up here and not understanding how each team at the front line is going to be impacted by this, I think it's important to roll that up and have a leadership and understanding what that impact is.
Yeah, look, I'm looking at Danielle Chappelle's question and having lived that, Danielle, what I'm going to say is, and the question's really, if there's misalignment in SLT, how do I as an HR professional, effectively champion the mission? And at the end of the day, it's going to be futile. You've got to go back and make sure the SLT is aligned. And then the other thing that I would suggest, in answer to your question directly, Rob, is do not miss the opportunity to do one-on-ones, skip level down. If you miss that opportunity, you're going to have happy ears and you're going to hear what you want to hear. And so sometimes it's a hard thing. It's the easiest thing to knock off your calendar. It's the thing that, it doesn't feel like the priority, like the burning customer issue. But if you force yourself to keep those skip level meetings, you will learn more and you will be closer to the organization and everybody will benefit. That's at least how I feel.
Love it. Avoid happy ears. With 20 seconds left, a few things. A big thank you. You're all busy individuals. Thank you for offering your time and insights for everyone here. Show them some love in the chat or with the reactions, but a huge thank you for spending time with us today. One last thing I just wanted to mention for everyone here. usually we do this once once a month, but in the next 2 weeks, we're actually having a conversation around feedback to impact. So actually 4 CEOs, different ones, except Monique, you're on double duty this time, to talk about strategies for building high trust environments and driving that feedback loop. So you'll see that in your email. Hopefully you can join us as well. But thank you all for joining us on this Tuesday. Have a wonderful rest of the week. Wonderful. I have so many notes. I gotta hopefully get AI to summarize them for me better than my chicken scratch. But thanks again and have a great rest of the week, everyone. Take care.